In 1970, an engine so powerful shook the walls and hearts of racing legends. But why did Ford secretly try to bury it? Stay tuned as we expose the real-life corporate betrayal behind Dan Gurney's revolutionary V8 that could have changed everything. Imagine an engine so advanced, so ahead of its time, that it could have reshaped the entire landscape of American motorsport. Now imagine that its fiercest opponent wasn't a competitor on the track, but the forces lurking behind the scenes. This was the reality for the Gurney Westlake 446 V8, a powerhouse born from the vision of a racing legend, Dan Gurney, and the ambition to challenge not only the best in America, but also the dominance of European engineering. The 446 wasn't just an engine, it was a statement. Westlake's genius came through in the intricate design of the cylinder heads, which used angled valves for optimal air and fuel flow. This wasn't common practice at the time, at least not at this level of refinement, and it gave the 446 a unique edge. Engineers who worked on it were blown away by its power-to-weight ratio and efficiency. Compared to Ford's own double-overhead camshaft V8, the 446 was lighter and, crucially, cheaper to build, a combination that sent shockwaves through the engineering teams of rival manufacturers. In the words of an AAR mechanic at the time, this engine didn't just perform, it screamed like a hurricane was trapped inside it. At the 1968 Indianapolis 500, the 446 had its debut. For Gurney's team, this wasn't just a race, it was a chance to prove that their vision of innovation could match the sport's heavyweights. Drivers, engineers, and fans were eager to see it in action, and the 446 didn't disappoint. Paired with a lightweight chassis, it proved it could go toe-to-toe with the sport's best. Although it didn't take first place, Bobby Unser clinched the win that year. The 446's second-place finish was the talk of the paddock. You could feel the electricity in the crowd as people realized they were witnessing the birth of something revolutionary. But the buzz wasn't just about that one race. The potential of the 446 was clear to everyone involved. While Ford's own V8 was no slouch, the 446 appeared, on paper and in practice, to be the better solution for IndyCar racing. And that's where things started to get complicated. Ford, which had provided support for the project, seemed torn between encouraging Gurney's efforts and protecting its own flagship engine programs. The 446 wasn't just innovative, it was disruptive. It presented a direct challenge to the status quo, especially to Ford's dominance in the racing world. This dynamism was part of what made the 446 so exciting, but it also made the engine's future less certain. Despite the promise it showed, cracks were beginning to form in its path to success. Behind the scenes, whispers of tension and disagreement with Ford added a layer of intrigue to the 446's story. Still, as fans of the sport watched Gurney's team perform with this radical new engine, the possibilities seemed endless. What if the most dangerous obstacles to Dan Gurney's revolutionary engine didn't come from rival teams or tough competitors, but from the corporate giant that had initially supported it? That's exactly what Ford's role in the story of the Gurney Westlake 446 suggests. While the engine's performance hinted at a groundbreaking future, Ford's internal dynamics and decisions shaped a very different outcome, filled with suspicion, political maneuvering, and frustration. By the late 1960s, Ford had carved out a reputation as one of the biggest names in motorsport, with notable victories at Le Mans and heavy involvement in Formula One. Their focus and pride were tied closely to their in-house engine programs, which included their reliable double-overhead camshaft V8s. Despite this, they initially showed support for Dan Gurney's efforts with the cutting-edge 446 engine. But as the 446 began showing signs of being not just good, but potentially better, cracks began to form in Ford's backing of the project. One of the first red flags came when Ford outright refused to allow Gurney to sell the Westlake-built cylinder heads for street use. At first glance, this might not seem like much, but it was a major move that hamstrung Gurney's team financially and commercially. Imagine how a revolution in racing could drive consumer interest if parts of its technology made their way into everyday cars. This was common practice. For example, Ford marketed engines like the Boss 302 by tying them to their street cars. But with the 446, they drew a hard line, denying that essential connection. Not only did this decision cut off a potential financial lifeline for the project, but it also signaled to the automotive world that Ford wasn't as invested in Gurney's success as they appeared to be. The tension extended beyond missed opportunities. Inside Ford, Carroll Miller, one of the company's lead engineers, allegedly dismissed the 446 outright, referring to it as a mere garage hobby. This wasn't just an insult. It reflected the dismissiveness and lack of enthusiasm from important figures within Ford. While Gurney and Westlake were focused on innovation, some at Ford saw their work as a distraction that didn't align with the company's vision. As Ford prioritized its own engine programs, the 446 was left to fight for whatever scraps of corporate attention it could get. And then came the allegations of outright sabotage. Though no definitive proof ever emerged, accusations still linger that Ford took steps to undermine the 446. One particularly shocking claim was that the company supplied Gurney with flawed engine blocks. These blocks, critical to racing reliability, supposedly led to mechanical failures on the track. The idea that Ford, a company ostensibly supporting Gurney, could secretly act against him is almost too bold to believe. Yet this claim aligns with other evidence of Ford's attempts to suppress the engine's progress. In a 2005 declassified memo that has since fueled much of the controversy, internal discussions at Ford referred to Gurney's project with the pointed statement, "Gurney's engine must not eclipse our flagship programs." These words put Ford's actions into sharp context. The 446 wasn't just another experimental engine, it was a direct threat. Imagine the implications if Gurney's engine outshone Ford's in-house developments, especially engines tied closely to their iconic production cars or high-profile racing teams. Ford had poured immense resources into these projects, and the very idea that Gurney, working outside their inner circle, could achieve greater success wasn't something they were prepared to tolerate. Despite the mounting challenges, Gurney and Westlake didn't quit. By 1970, they pushed the 446 even further, introducing a redesigned three-valve version of the engine that reached over 600 horsepower. On paper, this was an extraordinary leap. The engine had the endurance, the power, and the technological edge to stay competitive. But again, Ford refused to fully embrace it. They were exploring other paths at this time, including turbocharging, seen as the future of IndyCar racing, and this shift in focus made support for naturally aspirated engines like the 446 even scarcer. Beyond technical innovation, the financial realities also worked against Gurney. The 446, with its custom components and ambitious design, was a costly project. At a time when Ford was finding more lucrative returns by tying their engines to production cars, an expensive one-off racing engine was hard to justify. As the 1970s wore on, it became clear that Ford's shifting priorities and internal rivalries would leave the 446 fighting an impossible battle. By 1971, development had all but stopped. When asked years later about Ford's role in the engine story, Gurney didn't hold back. In 1990, reflecting on the disappointment, he summed it up bitterly. "Let's just say Ford didn't like an outsider showing them up." Those words paint a clear picture of a corporate culture that, rather than nurturing groundbreaking ideas, sought to protect its control at all costs. The Gurney-Westlake 446 wasn't defeated because it lacked potential. It was stopped because it represented a threat, a bold outsider idea that could upset the balance within one of the most powerful automotive companies on the planet. What might have been possible if Ford had thrown its full weight behind it? That's a question history can never answer. But the story of the 446 leaves no doubt. Sometimes the biggest obstacles to progress come not from competitors, but from those who are supposed to be on your side. The Gurney Eagle 446 wasn't a failure. It was a target. An engine so advanced, so disruptive, that it became a victim of its own brilliance. Ford didn't reject it because it lacked potential. They rejected it because it threatened their own priorities. Dan Gurney himself acknowledged this tension, saying, "Let's just say Ford didn't like an outsider showing them up." The story of the 446 raises a much bigger question. How many game-changing innovations have been buried by agendas and corporate control? Progress often has a cost, but it's dreamers like Gurney who remind us why pushing boundaries matters.